The ashes of the ship, the desert stretched wide and empty, its golden sand glowing under the hot twin suns. The wind carried with it the smell of smoke, thick and bitter. John, a human wanderer, stopped in his tracks. His boots sank slightly into the warm sand as his eyes narrowed. In the distance, a black cloud of smoke twisted upward into the bright sky. A lonely signal in the wasteland. John had traveled this route many times before. He had seen many strange things, abandoned outposts, broken machines, even the bones of fallen soldiers. But this smoke was different. Something inside him told him to check. Against his better judgment, he walked toward it, his hand resting on the old rifle slung across his back. As he got closer, the sight became clear. A ship, alien in design, lay shattered in the sand. Its hull was burned, metal twisted like paper. Fires still licked at the edges, and sparks shot from broken wires. The ship had been attacked, that much was clear. Raiders, or maybe worse. John's heart beat faster. Shipwrecks always meant danger. If raiders had done this, they might still be nearby. But then he heard it. Faint, fragile, almost lost in the hiss of flames. A cry. Not the cry of a grown fighter, but the weak sound of a baby. He froze. For a moment his mind told him to turn back. Walk away. This wasn't his fight. But his feet refused to move. Slowly, he followed the sound, stepping carefully over broken panels and scorched sand. There, near a piece of the cracked hull, he found her. An alien woman, her clothes torn and covered in ash, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Fear, pain, and desperation all at once. The baby in her arms gave a soft whimper, too weak to even cry. Properly, the woman tried to rise but stumbled, nearly falling back to the ground. John rushed forward, kneeling beside her. The baby's skin was pale blue, tiny hands trembling. The mother's voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, don't leave us." John's throat felt dry. He had seen plenty of alien survivors before, but he had never been this close to one in such condition. "Easy," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Her face was streaked with dirt, but tears cut clear lines through the ash. They killed him," she whispered, glancing at the wreckage. "My mate. Gone. They'll come back. Please. My baby." Her words struck him harder than the desert wind. Raiders. They had slaughtered her husband and left her to die. John felt a knot tighten in his chest. He looked down at the infant, who gave a soft cough, tiny chest rising and falling with effort. John hesitated. Helping them meant risk. If raiders returned and found him with survivors, he'd be hunted, too. His brain told him to walk away, but his heart told him something else. He thought of his own past, his own family, long gone. He remembered the silence that followed, the loneliness that never left. He made his choice. "Can you walk?" he asked, adjusting his rifle strap. The alien widow shook her head weakly. "I'll try." John gently slipped an arm around her, careful not to press against the child. Her body was frail, trembling from exhaustion. He helped her stand, steadying her with slow patience. "My shelter isn't far," he said. "You'll be safe there, but we have to move now." As they began walking, the sound of distant engines echoed faintly in the desert air. John's eyes snapped toward the horizon. Shapes moved against the light. Fast vehicles kicking up trails of sand. Raiders. His pulse quickened. They didn't have long. He tightened his grip on the widow's arm and quickened his pace. She stumbled but held on, clutching the baby tightly to her chest. "Stay close," John said firmly. "Don't stop no matter what." Behind them, the wrecked ship crackled and spat sparks, a dying beast swallowed by the desert. Ahead, danger drew nearer with every second. The widow whispered again, her voice shaking with both fear and hope. "Why? Why are you helping us?" John didn't answer at first. He only glanced down at the fragile child in her arms. Then, with a firm voice, he said, "Because no one else will." And with that, he pushed forward, leading them away from the ashes of the ship, toward a future neither of them could see, yet but one that would change their lives forever. The desert air pressed heavy around them as John half led, half carried the alien widow away from the smoking wreck. The baby's soft whimpers cut through the silence, pulling at his heart in ways he didn't expect. Every step felt slower, heavier. The heat drained them, but the real danger was not the sun. It was the faint rumble of engines growing louder. Behind them, John glanced back. On the horizon, 3 dark specks darted like vultures circling a dying beast. Raiders. He knew their kind well. Men and creatures who fed on weakness, who stripped survivors of ships and left nothing but bones in the sand. If they caught up, there would be no mercy. The widow clutched her baby tighter, fear clear in her trembling hands. "They'll find us," she whispered, her voice shaking like thin glass ready to break. "Please, don't leave us here. Please, human." John's steps faltered. For a moment he thought about her words. He had promised safety, but promises were fragile things in the desert. Still, he couldn't ignore the way she looked at him, with desperate hope, as if he were the only wall between her and the grave. "We keep moving," John said firmly, tightening his grip on her arm. "My shelter isn't far. If we're lucky, we'll get there before they reach us." Her eyes watered, but she nodded. The baby stirred and let out a weak cry, a sound too small to survive in such a cruel world. John's chest tightened as he adjusted his pace, trying to shield them both with his own body. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each crunch of his boots on the sand seemed too loud. Each gust of wind seemed to carry the smell of engines closer. Finally, as the suns dipped lower, painting the sky in deep red, John spotted the jagged rocks that marked the hidden path to his shelter. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The widow stumbled, nearly falling. He caught her quickly, but her body was trembling worse than before. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. I can't go any further. Please, save my baby. Take her if I cannot." John froze. The widow looked at him with tear-filled eyes, pressing the small bundle closer to him. "If I fall, promise me she will live. Promise me you won't let them take her." The plea cut into him deeper. Then a blade. He remembered the war, the friends he lost, the helpless eyes of children caught in the crossfire. He had walked away too many times before. He couldn't do it again. John shook his head firmly. "No, you don't get to give up. You walk. Hold on, you fight. Both of you make it, understand?" The widow's lips parted as if to protest, but the fire in his voice silenced her. For the first time since he found her, she saw not just a wanderer but a man who refused to surrender to the desert's cruelty. She took a shaky breath and nodded. John shifted his stance, pulling her arm across his shoulder. "Lean on me. Don't stop." Step by step they moved forward. Behind them the engines grew louder, closer. Shadows lengthened across the sand. The raiders were closing in, and soon they would spot the trail. Finally, they reached the narrow rocks. John guided her into the path hidden from the open desert. The walls rose on either side, giving them some cover. His shelter was still a half-hour away, but they had a chance now. As they walked through the dim path, the widow spoke again, her voice breaking through the heavy silence. "Why? Why help us? Humans. They don't care for my kind. Many would. Leave us to die. Why risk yourself?" John didn't answer right away. The baby's tiny hand had slipped free from the blanket, grasping weakly at the air. He gently touched the child's fingers with his calloused hand. The grip was small, fragile, yet it clung to him with surprising strength. Finally, John said, "Because I've seen enough death, and I'm tired of walking away." The widow looked at him, tears welling in her alien eyes. For the first time, she didn't just see a stranger. She saw a shield, a protector. maybe even something more. But before she could speak, a sharp sound echoed behind them. A shot. A piece of rock shattered near John's head, spraying dust and stone. The raiders had found their trail. "Run!" John barked, pushing her forward. He grabbed his rifle, spinning toward the source of the shot. The figures were there now, dark shapes moving quickly through the fading light, weapons in their hands. The widow stumbled forward, clutching her child. John stayed behind her, firing a warning shot to slow the raiders. His rifle roared, echoing, in the narrow path. One raider ducked, another cursed, but they didn't stop. Heart-pounding, John retreated step by step, keeping his body between the widow and the attackers. Each shot bought them seconds, but seconds were precious. The widow's voice carried through the chaos, trembling but strong. "Don't leave us, please." John's jaw tightened. "I won't," he said. "Not today." And with that, he led them deeper into the rocky path, into the unknown. The cries of pursuit echoing behind them like wolves hunting prey. The narrow canyon twisted like a scar in the desert, swallowing the widow, her baby, and the human who guided them. John's boots pounded against the rough ground as he moved quickly, one hand gripping his rifle, the other steadying the alien widow at his side. Behind them, faint shouts echoed, mixed with the engines of raiders who searched the wreck. For now, the rocks gave them cover, but it would not last forever. The widow's breaths came in short gasps, and the baby whimpered softly against her chest. Every sound seemed too loud in John's ears. He kept glancing over his shoulder, certain shadows moved just out of sight. At last, the canyon opened into a hidden valley surrounded by sharp ridges. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than jagged stone. But here, tucked against a cliffside, was John's shelter. A camouflaged metal door stood half buried in the rock. It was old, patched with scrap, but solid enough to keep out raiders and the desert storms. John pressed a hidden switch and the heavy door groaned open. "Inside, quick," he ordered. The widow hesitated for just a moment, eyes wide at the strange structure, but then the baby gave a weak cough and she hurried forward. John followed, slamming the door shut behind them. The lock clanked, and the outside world disappeared, leaving only silence. The inside of the shelter was dim, lit by a few humming lamps. The air smelled of metal, oil, and faint herbs John kept for trade. The room was small but organized, storage crates stacked along the walls, a workbench cluttered with tools, and a simple cot pushed into the corner. The widow sank onto the cot, clutching her child close. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion, but her eyes never left John. He moved with purpose, fetching a jug of water, clean cloth, and a small tin of dried food. "Drink," he said, handing her the jug. She looked at it with hesitation, as if unsure whether to trust him, but thirst won. She lifted it carefully to her lips, drinking with small, shaky sips. Then she tipped it toward the baby, wetting the child's lips. The infant stirred, eyes fluttering open just long enough to drink, a little before falling weakly back against her chest. John crouched in front of them. The baby's skin was pale, almost too pale. Its tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He frowned. "She needs more than water," he said quietly. The widow's voice cracked. "Do you have medicine?" John stood, crossing to a crate against the wall. From inside, he pulled a battered medical kit, old military issue. Most of the supplies were long expired, but he still had a few working tools. He set the kit on the table, opening it with a soft click. The widow watched with wide eyes as John prepared a small breathing device. "This might help clear her lungs," he explained. His hands were steady, practiced. He had done this before, in another life, on another battlefield. He hated how natural it still felt. He lifted the baby gently. The widow tensed, but when she saw his careful touch, she let him hold the child. The baby's tiny fingers curled weakly around his rough thumb. John placed the breathing mask over the child's nose and mouth, switching it on. A soft hum filled the room. The widow leaned forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "Will she live?" John kept his focus on the device. "She's fighting. That's all that matters right now." Minutes passed slowly. The baby coughed, then let out a stronger, clearer cry. It was still weak but no longer fading. The sound filled the shelter like a fragile song. John let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Carefully, he handed the baby back to her mother. The widow clutched her child close, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you, human." John shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Raiders don't give up easy. They'll search the wreck, then the valley. If they find this place..." He let the thought hang. Her expression hardened, just a little. "I will help. I can fight." The word surprised him. He had expected fear, not resolve. "You?" he asked, eyebrow raised. She nodded. "I was not always weak. My mate taught me to use blades. I know how to hide, how to survive." She looked down at the baby, her voice softer. "But now, I cannot run as before. Not with her. I need you." John stared at her for a long moment. There it was. The truth. Not just a plea, but a bond forming in the ashes of loss. She needed him. And though he would not admit it out loud, he needed them too. He turned toward his workbench, pulling open another crate. Inside were weapons, an old shotgun, a few pistols, and traps made from scrap. He began laying them out. "If they come here," John said, his voice steady, "we won't just hide. We'll make them regret it." The widow watched him, her fear slowly giving way to a spark of hope. The baby stirred in her arms, breathing easier now, safe for the moment. For the first time since the wreck, the widow allowed herself to whisper, almost like a prayer, "Maybe. Maybe fate sent you to us." John paused, looking back at her. For a moment, the weight of the desert, the ghosts of his past, all seemed lighter. He didn't reply, but in his silence, something new began to form in the hidden shelter, a fragile family, born in fire and danger. And outside, beyond the locked door, the desert carried the sound of engines closer. The raiders were not finished yet. The night settled heavy over the desert, hiding the stars behind thick clouds of dust. Inside John's shelter, the widow rocked her baby gently, humming a soft tune in her own alien tongue. The child's breathing had grown steadier since John treated her, but her voice was still fragile. Every small whimper carried through the cramped space like the cry of a bird in the dark. John sat at the workbench, his rifle spread open in pieces. He cleaned the weapon with slow, steady motions, each movement precise. His ears stayed sharp, tuned to the faintest sound beyond the thick walls of the shelter. He didn't like the silence outside. Silence in the desert never meant safety. The widow broke it first. "They are out there, aren't they?" she whispered. John didn't look up. He slid a piece back into place, the soft click echoing in the room. Raiders don't leave loose ends. If they think survivors escaped the wreck, they'll keep searching. Her eyes lowered. She stroked her child's tiny head. "They'll smell her scent. They'll hear her cry. They always do." John finally glanced up, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "Then we make sure they don't get close enough to hear." He stood, moving toward the door. The widow's head lifted quickly. "Where are you going?" "Setting traps," John said simply. He pulled a small crate of supplies toward him, wires, spikes and old mines he had salvaged years ago. The widow's grip tightened on the baby. "It's too dangerous outside. If they see you..." "They won't," John interrupted. "I've done this before." Her lips parted, but she didn't stop him. Instead, she whispered, "Let me help." John frowned. "You should rest." The widow shook her head firmly. "Resting won't keep her safe. I will help." She placed the baby gently into a padded crate lined with blankets and stood, her legs trembling but her eyes sharp. "I can keep watch. My ears are sharper than yours." For the first time, John gave her a short nod of respect. "All right, but stay close to the door." They stepped outside into the night. The desert was quiet but not peaceful. It was the quiet of hunters waiting. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow looked alive. John moved with practiced steps, crouching low as he set thin wires between rocks and placed hidden spikes beneath the sand. He worked quickly, his mind mapping out the ground like a battlefield. The widow stood near the entrance, her gaze sweeping the horizon. Her large alien eyes reflected the faint glow of the twin moons, catching every flicker of movement in the distance. She whispered suddenly, "There, by the ridge." John froze. He followed her gaze and saw them. 3 figures moving slowly across the sand, their outlines just visible in the moonlight. Raiders. They were careful now, scanning the rocks like predators sniffing the ground. John's jaw tightened. They're testing the valley. He finished setting the last trap and motioned her inside. Once the heavy door shut again, the shelter felt smaller than before. The widow hugged her baby close, her voice trembling. What if they find the trail here? What if they break down the door? John placed his rifle across his lap and sat against the wall, his voice low but steady. Then they'll regret it. The widow studied him in silence for a moment. She wanted to believe his words, but fear clung to her heart. She shifted closer to him, lowering her voice. When I begged you in the wreck, I thought you might leave us. I thought you would walk away. John stared at the floor, silent. Why didn't you? She pressed. He finally looked up, his eyes shadowed. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, to call for help and hear nothing but silence. Her lips parted. She saw the pain in his face, hidden behind the walls he built around himself. Without meaning to, she reached out, resting a hand on his arm. Then maybe you were meant to hear us. John didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. The contact was brief, yet it carried a warmth neither of them had felt in years. Then it came. A sudden sound outside. A crunch of sand under heavy boots. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. The widow froze, panic in her eyes. She pressed the child to her chest, rocking gently, whispering in her alien tongue to calm her. But the cry had already slipped out, carried through the cracks of the shelter like a beacon in the night. John was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the small slit window, peering through. His heart sank. Shadows moved closer. The raiders had found their trail. He whispered sharply, "They're here." The widow's arms tightened around the baby. Her voice cracked. "Then we fight?" John's jaw hardened. "No. First we wait. Let them walk into the traps." Outside, faint voices rose in the night. Rough laughter mixed with the click of weapons. One raider stepped too close to the wire hidden in the sand. The shelter shook with a sudden explosion. A scream tore through the air. The widow gasped, holding her child tight. John kept his eye to the slit, watching, waiting. The raiders scattered, shouting in anger. He whispered, almost to himself, "That's just the beginning." The widow looked at him, her fear mingled now with something else. Trust. She had seen humans before, but never one like this. And deep in the desert, as the smoke from the trap curled into the night, the raiders regrouped. They would not stop. Not until the shelter was broken, or they were dead. The desert night was alive with whispers of death. Beyond the walls of John's shelter, the raiders regrouped, shouting in their guttural tongue, their torches flickering like angry eyes in the dark. Smoke from the earlier explosion drifted through the valley, carrying the scent of burned flesh and broken metal. Inside, John moved with the calm of a soldier who had faced danger too many times before. He checked his rifle, reloaded it, and lined extra rounds along the workbench. The alien widow sat on the cot, holding her baby tight. The child stirred uneasily, sensing the storm outside. John crouched near the door, his ear pressed to the thick metal. The sound of footsteps approached. Careful, cautious. The raiders had learned from the first trap. They were hunters now, circling the shelter, searching for weakness. The widow's voice trembled as she whispered, "They will not stop." "No," John replied simply. "They won't." His eyes stayed sharp, scanning the narrow slit window. He could see movement, shadows crawling closer like wolves around a fire. The first attack came suddenly. A heavy thud shook the shelter as something slammed against the door. The widow gasped, clutching her child. John held up a hand, motioning for silence. Another crash followed, then a third. The raiders were testing the strength of the door. John's jaw tightened. "Stay back," he told her. She didn't argue. She pulled the blanket over her baby's head and rocked her gently, humming a quiet song to keep her calm. The next sound was worse, a hiss, followed by smoke seeping in through the cracks. The raiders had lit firebombs, hoping to choke them out. John cursed under his breath. He grabbed a bucket of sand from the corner and threw it over the smoldering edges. Then, moving swiftly, he slid open a hidden hatch in the wall. A narrow slit opened to the outside, just wide enough for his rifle. He waited, breathing steady, finger on the trigger. A shadow stepped into the moonlight. A raider crept toward the shelter, torch in one hand, blade in the other. John exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle thundered. The raider dropped instantly, torch falling and sputtering in the sand. The others shouted in rage, their voices echoing through the valley. The widow flinched at the sound of the shot, but her eyes lit with a flicker of hope. John had promised they would regret coming here, and now she believed him. The raiders responded, fast. Bullets slammed against the metal door, sparks flying with each strike. The shelter shook, but the walls held strong. John fired again through the slit, hitting another figure. Still, there were too many. "They'll try the roof next," John muttered. He pulled down a ladder and climbed up into a narrow shaft above the main room. The widow watched him vanish into the ceiling, her heart racing. She whispered to her baby, "He fights for us. He fights for you." On the roof, John moved like a shadow. The desert wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of smoke and blood. He crawled low, setting a small mine near the edge. A raider climbed the ridge, his claws scraping the rock. He reached the top, eyes gleaming with hunger. But before he could rise, John slammed the butt of his rifle into his face, sending him tumbling back into the dark. Another raider appeared, blade flashing. John rolled aside, the strike missing his chest by inches. He swung his knife in return, slashing across the raider's arm. A howl tore through the night. The raider lunged again, but John's boot struck his chest, sending him crashing down the slope. Below, the widow heard the sounds of battle above her. She wanted to rush to help, but the baby's cry held her back. She tightened her grip on the child, whispering prayers in her alien tongue. Her hands shook, but her spirit did not. Then the explosion came. One of John's mines lit the night with fire, hurling two raiders backward in a storm of sand and flame. Their screams carried into the valley, silenced only by the crack of John's rifle. The remaining raiders hesitated. Fear crept into their shouts. They had expected an easy kill, not a storm of traps and a human who fought like a beast from legend. Inside, the widow pressed her forehead to her child's. "He will not let them take us," she whispered, as much to herself as to the baby. At last, silence fell outside. John slid back into the shelter, covered in dust, sweat dripping from his brow. He reloaded his rifle calmly, as though nothing had happened. The widow stared at him with wide eyes. You fought them all." John shrugged, sitting against the wall. "Not all. More will come." But the baby gave a soft laugh, a small, delicate sound completely out of place in the tense shelter. Both John and the widow turned, surprised. For the first time since the wreck, the child didn't sound weak. She sounded alive. The widow's tears returned, but they were different now. She whispered, "She laughs because she knows she feels safe with you." John didn't answer. He only leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. But deep inside, something shifted. The widow's words planted a seed, a thought he had buried long ago. Family. The desert night wasn't finished with them, but in that small moment, they were more than survivors. They were something stronger. The shelter smelled of gunpowder and smoke. The echoes of gunfire had faded into the desert night, but the silence that followed was heavier than the battle itself. John sat against the wall, rifle resting across, his lap, listening to the faint hum of the lamps. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, the old rhythm of a soldier calming himself after a fight. Across from him, the widow cradled her baby close. The child, once weak, had stopped crying and now stared up at her with bright, curious eyes. When the little one let out a soft giggle, the sound struck the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. John's lips twitched, almost into a smile. He hadn't heard laughter like that in years. Not since. He pushed the thought away before it could hurt. The widow's gaze met his. Her alien eyes, shimmering faintly in the dim light, were filled with gratitude. "You saved us again," she whispered. John shook his head. "Just bought us time. Raiders don't quit easy. They'll be back, and in greater numbers." Her voice trembled, but her words held strength. "Then until they come, we live, we breathe, we are still here. That is enough." For a moment the shelter was quiet except for the baby's soft sounds. John's heart, hardened by years of loneliness, felt an unfamiliar weight. Not the burden of war or survival, but something gentler, something dangerous in its own way. He stood abruptly, moving to the workbench. "We can't stay here long," he said. "This place isn't safe anymore. I'll take you somewhere better." The widow frowned, her hand stroking the baby's small head. "Why? Why risk more? You could leave us here and go." John froze, tools in his hand. He didn't turn around when he answered. "Because I can't." The words surprised even him. They were heavier than steel, sharper than blades. He set the tools down and faced her at last. "You asked me before, why help you? The truth is, I've lost too much already, my family, my people. When I saw you in that wreck, I couldn't walk away. Not again." The widow's eyes softened. She rose slowly, crossing the room until she stood close enough to see the lines of pain etched on his face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, she whispered, "Then perhaps we are your family now." John's throat tightened. He looked at the baby, who reached a tiny hand toward him, fingers curling in the air. He hesitated, then stepped forward and let the child grasp his thumb. The small touch burned through the walls he had built around himself. The widow smiled faintly. "She has chosen you." John swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. But deep inside, something shifted. A warmth he thought had died long ago flickered to life again. The hours passed slowly. John and the widow worked together, gathering supplies into packs. She moved with more strength now, no longer trembling like before. Whenever she faltered, John steadied her, and whenever he grew too grim, the baby's laughter softened the edges. Later, as the widow rocked her child to sleep, she began to sing softly. The melody was strange, flowing in notes unlike any human tune. John sat nearby, listening silently. He didn't understand the words, but the feeling in them reached him all the same. When the song ended, the widow looked up shyly. "It is an old lullaby, from my world. My mate used to sing it with me." Her voice broke, but she held firm. "Now I sing it for her, and for you, if you will listen." John nodded once. "I'll listen," and he did. For the first time in years, he let the sound of someone else's voice ease the weight in his chest. The next morning, pale light filtered into the valley. John packed the last of the weapons and checked his maps. "We head north. There's an outpost, old but safer than this. From there we can find transport off this rock." The widow adjusted the cloth around her baby, then stepped to his side. "We go together, then." John glanced at her, then at the child, who blinked up at him with bright eyes. Something about that gaze made his chest ache with both pain and hope. He muttered softly, almost to himself, "Guess I'm not alone anymore." The widow heard him. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "No, you are not." They stepped outside into the cool morning air. The desert stretched before them, wide and dangerous. But for the first time, John didn't see emptiness. He saw purpose. The widow walked beside him, her child secure in her arms. Each step was uncertain, yet full of quiet strength. And though raiders still hunted them, though danger shadowed their path, a new bond held them together. Not strangers, not just survivors. Something more, a family in the making. The journey north was not easy. The desert stretched endless, waves of golden sand glowing under the suns. The alien widow carried her baby close to her chest, while John walked at her side, his rifle slung across his back and his eyes scanning the horizon for danger. For days, they moved between valleys and ridges, resting only when the child needed to feed or sleep. They drank carefully from the little water they carried and ate small portions of dried food. Every night John built a small fire, its glow hidden by rocks, while the widow sang her soft lullabies to calm the baby. The raiders hunted them still. Twice John spotted trails of smoke far behind, proof their enemies had not given up, but the traps he had left at the shelter had slowed them down. Time was precious, and he used every moment to keep them ahead. On the fifth morning, the land changed. The sand thinned, replaced by patches of rock and scrub. In the distance, the jagged outline of an old outpost appeared, a forgotten station from a war long past. Its towers leaned, half broken, but its walls still stood. The widow's tired eyes brightened with hope. "Is this the safe place you spoke of?" John nodded slowly. "Safer than the desert, and maybe safe enough to start again." When they reached the gates, John pushed them open with effort. Rust groaned loudly, echoing into the stillness. Inside, the outpost was silent, its rooms covered in dust. Yet there was shelter from the suns, old water tanks that still worked, and even a small power grid that hummed back to life under John's hands. The widow laid her baby gently on a blanket, and for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to rest without fear. The child, stronger now, laughed and reached for the light streaming through a crack in the wall. John watched them quietly, his chest heavy with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He had been a soldier, a wanderer, a man without purpose. But here in this broken place, he saw something different. He saw family. That evening, as the suns dipped low, the widow approached him. She stood tall despite the weight of her loss, her eyes glowing softly in the fading light. "My people will search for me," she said gently. "If I call them, they will come." John's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come, the choice between staying together or parting ways. "Then you should go with them," he said quietly. "You and your child deserve to be with your own kind." The widow shook her head. She stepped closer, her voice firm. "When the wreck burned, I thought everything was gone. My mate, my hope, my future. But you—" Her voice broke for a moment, but she forced it steady again. "You gave me more than safety. You gave us a reason to live." She looked at her baby, who cooed softly, then back at John. "We do not need to leave you. We choose to stay." John's breath caught in his chest. "Stay? With me?" The widow's lips curved into a soft smile. "Yes. My child already calls you father in her heart. And I see more than a savior in you." John swallowed hard. For a long moment he could not find words. He had built his life on silence, on walls that kept him apart from everyone. Yet now, those walls crumbled like sand. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll build something here, together." That night, the outpost felt alive again. John repaired lights that glowed softly. The widow cooked a meal with the little supplies they had, and the baby laughed at every flicker of fire. For the first time in years, John sat at a table with others, not soldiers, not strangers, but family. As the baby drifted to sleep, John stepped outside. The desert stretched endless, the stars now free of clouds shining bright above. The wind carried only silence, not the growl of engines. For once, it felt like peace. The widow joined him, wrapping a cloth around her shoulders. She stood close, their arms brushing. Neither spoke for a while, but the silence was warm, not empty. Finally, John said softly, I never thought I'd have this again. The widow tilted her head. What is this? He looked at her, then at the stars. A family. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was steady. Then let us protect it, together. The desert still held dangers. Raiders might return, storms might rise, and the outpost would test their strength. But none of that mattered now. For in the ashes of loss, something new had been born. John, once alone, had found purpose again. The widow, once abandoned, had found hope. And the child, once crying in the wreckage, now laughed under the stars, safe in the arms of a family made not by blood, but by choice. It was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. A new beginning.